All right, welcome back to the RCA channel, guys. We have got another fit video here for you today. You may recognise the man standing on my right. It's Ryan Thomas, extraordinaire bike racer. He's had some time off the bike recently with a new collarbone, I believe, right?
Yeah, a bit of metal in the collarbone, feels good.
He's surgically enhanced now. It was a mountain biking accident, wasn't it?
It was,
yeah.
it was.
Mate, that mountain biking's bad for you. You should stick to road cycling. So he's had a bit of time off the bike, a new dad as well. Congratulations, mate, again on that. And so he's just getting back into the riding a bit more seriously now. And obviously, to my left here, we're 2 bikes later. He's had a BMC in between this one and the original Memel that we filmed back in 2022. So this is a new Sculptura, which has come from Tom at Tandem Cycles down in Brizzy. Shout out to Tom. And this thing is completely geometrically different to both of your other bikes.
Yeah, very different.
It's significantly shorter and taller. The front end setup is a lot shorter. Because you're not sort of racing this thing really aggressively at the moment, we're not too fussed with that. And we're actually going to use this bike to do a little bit of experimentation. Because one problem that Ryan's still having is a bit of foot numbness. We've been battling this on and off, trying a few different things over the last couple of years, and he's still getting a little bit of it. This bike in particular has a couple of things going for it. It's shorter and taller, which means that the hip angle is going to be more open at the front, riding more upright, and the cranks are shorter as well. These are 170s versus 172.5. So the latest theory that we've got with Ryan's foot numbness is that it may actually be a popliteal artery entrapment, which is a circulatory issue across the back of the knee joint. So we'll go through a bit of the anatomy of that later on. I'll explain that in a bit more detail because it's quite interesting. If you're a super fit geek like me, mate, it's quite interesting. And you. So we'll go through some of the anatomy behind that later. But what we're going to do is set up some new shoes and a completely new bike and transfer a lot of these dimensions across and see how we go. So let's get into it. All right, popliteal artery entrapment. I promised I'd explain this, and we're going to try and give it a go. So this is a very rare source of foot numbness and circulatory problems across the back of the calf. Basically what happens is your arteries and your blood vessels, they need to kink as your joints bend, right? So the large ones which cross joints, like the popliteal artery here, which crosses the back of your knee joint, every time your knee flexes through the stroke, the artery needs to bend, right? They're flexible. They're a pipe, essentially, like a silicon pipe almost is the best analogy. And as it kinks, you will have heard of people having iliac artery endofibrosis. As it kinks, you can get fibrosis on the walls of the artery, which is basically thickening and scarring of the artery because it doesn't like being bent millions of times in a row to a really deep angle. That scarring and fibrosis can then narrow the arterial wall down and cause circulatory issues. In the case of the iliac artery, it causes huge, like quadricep loss of function and everything. Across the back of the knee joint, if your calf isn't very active, if it's not doing a lot during the pedal stroke, the occlusion or the lack of circulation to the back of your calf musculature won't really present as pain in the calf musculature until it gets extremely bad. And when it gets really bad, you get really severe, what we call claudication pain in the back of your calf, which is basically no oxygen getting to the muscle because of a lack of blood flow. But if it's a mild occlusion or it's not really closed down, but as your knee bends at the top of the stroke, it kinks it enough that it stops the blood flow briefly and then opens it back up again, enough circulation will get into the back of your leg that you won't actually get any symptoms down there. You'll get circulatory loss to the foot, which is further down the chain. It's, you know, it's the first thing that kind of loses perfusion as you get this kinking in the artery here. So this is quite rare. I don't know if it's even like a recognized medical cyclist's condition. I've Googled it and done literature searches and stuff on it, but I've seen this happen in people, and the only way you figure it out is you shorten the crank length and you see what happens. So as you shorten the crank length, obviously the knee at the top of the stroke doesn't need to bend as far, doesn't need to kink as far, so it opens up more, can let enough circulation through that it stops the occlusion. So our next port of call, if the 170s are no significantly better or maybe a little bit better, but it's not quite gone, is we'll test you with some 165s. And if that solves it and doesn't cause any other problems, I'll try and convince you to stick with shorter cranks. So this is it's a pretty rare condition. I wouldn't say to all the people out there that are watching this that, you know, you should jump to the conclusion that you've got a popliteal artery occlusion when you've got persistent foot numbness, but it is technically possible. So yeah, we'll try and investigate that in the next 6 months with you, Rhino, and just see if that is actually what's happening. Yeah, you look perfect, man. Crank the load up a little, just go up a couple of cogs. I mean, this is why we keep detailed notes so that we can just replicate everything perfectly 2 years later without having to think about anything. But it does look exactly the same. At the moment, it looks fucking perfect. Yeah, it's really interesting. The reach and the drop don't look that short either.
It does, It doesn't feel wrong.
It doesn't look that
It
wrong.
should feel wrong though.
Classic example of a hypercompensator. All right.
And even when I get aero, it feels...
Yeah, it's pretty much okay.
It's 30 mil.
Apparently. Measured. The Memel had a 140 on it, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, it's so different.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel any different.
Great example of a hypercompensator. So this is a great example, everyone, of what I would call an extremely high-level compensator. Ryan is a crazy good compensator. It's been 2.5 years since I've seen him. He's in much worse physical condition. He's not as fit as he was. He's had time off with a fracture and everything. This bike is completely different to his old bike. His old bike had a 140 millimeter stem. This is a 100. The geometry of the frames is probably 10 millimeters off here and there, but the reach on that bike was from the saddle to the center of the bar was probably around 30 to 40 millimeters longer, and he looks completely fine. We also know from our old dimensions that the bar was about 30 to 40 millimeters lower back in 2022 when we saw him on that bike. So this is a massively shorter, hugely more upright position, and he basically looks the same. He looks almost identical. We'll try and put some split screen shots of him on the two bikes, but this is a great example of someone who's a hyper compensator. Ryan can adapt to different positions, like grossly different positions, by altering his pelvis rotation and altering the posture of his spine subtly to basically achieve two completely different positions with pretty good comfort levels. So yeah, you're like the easiest person in the world to fit because it doesn't really matter that much where the contact points are. He can adapt to them with no significant problems. Same thing with the leg length shim that we've got underneath his right foot, which is 4 millimeters long. The stagger that we've got in his cleat position, which is still there. He looks exactly the same as he did 2.5 years ago, but we know that when he doesn't have those things there, he's still fine. He still doesn't have any pain. So an amazing high-level compensator. I'm kind of jealous, Ryan, because I'm not like this, and most people aren't like this. If you get me and you put a 4 millimeter shim under my foot or you stagger my cleats the wrong way or something, I'll be crippled within 10 minutes. But Ryan is an exceptional compensator. So he said this bike was comfortable and I didn't believe him until I saw him on it, but he basically looks pretty much fine. We know that you can tolerate more reach and drop. So as you get fitter, the bar can go out and down, and you're considering a one-piece cockpit on this. We'll talk to you about the length and the drop on that soon, but I'd probably hedge your bets and go with a 120. I'd probably go 20 mil longer. It won't be as long as the Memel, but it won't be as short as this. And you'll want to move the seat up and forward as you get leaner and faster so that you're more over the top of the stroke. As your upper body gets lighter and your threshold power goes up, you'll have less inclination to need the seat as far back. So you'll be able to basically ride it in a more aggressive position with the seat up and forward without any trouble. So as you get leaner and faster, the seat goes up, the bars go down, and the seat can come forward. So that's all for the future, mate. But
would you take that out?
Yeah, definitely.
That 10?
There's a 5 millimeter spacer there. We'll definitely get rid of that. You will have to probably get someone to lop the top of the steer tube, I imagine. But it's still 30 millimeters higher than your other bike. So taking 5 millimeters out is not going to be an issue. But yeah, you look good on it, man. And you're getting along well with the new seat too.
Love it.
Yeah. So I think what we'll find when we do the split screen shots of Ryan on the two bikes is the big difference will be lumbar spine posture. You'll see most likely on the Memel that the curvature here is obviously much flatter because he's rotated his pelvis forward to meet the longer, lower position. So we'll see that this curvature will probably be significantly flatter on his old bike than it is now. And again, just an example of a person who can compensate around positional problems amazingly well by altering his posture. Half your luck, mate. Wish I could do that. All right. So guys, what we've got here is a situation where the two saddles that Ryan was using and is now using are completely different. So we've set his position up so that he's well balanced. The layback of the seat looks really good. The seat height's perfect. What we're going to do now is measure the seat setback relative to the crank center. And we're going to compare that with his old seat setback, which was on a totally different saddle. I think it was some obscure Chinese saddle that you had back then, mate.
It was a Memel brand.
A Memel brand saddle. So we're going to compare the layback, and once we know, because the nose length of the two seats is totally different, right? Now that we know your pelvis is in the correct position relative to the crank center, we can then compare the two setbacks and then extrapolate to the reach, because the reach dimension that I gave you for the old bike was measured from the nose of the seat to the center of the bar, and we know that the nose of the seat is now a completely different distance behind the bottom bracket. So we can do a little bit of maths here. This one, your old dimension was 80 millimeters, and this one, it's actually pretty close, 85 millimeters behind the bottom bracket. Now the old bike, the reach dimension was 590 millimeters. So from the nose of the seat to the center of the bar was 590. We know that this is now 5 millimeters different, so we're going to call it, effectively it should be 585 if everything was the same. And it's measuring out horizontally at around 570. So it's about 15 millimeters shorter, effectively. So this takes into account the different nose length of the seat, the different location of your pelvis on the seat, because different saddles, you sit further forward on them or further back. And this is a way, if you've got two different bikes with two completely different saddles on them, you can then measure the setbacks and then extrapolate out to the reach from your old number. So effectively, it's only around 15 millimeters shorter when everything's taken into account, which means that if we went to a 10 or 20 millimeter longer cockpit, you'd be back where you used to be. This also explains why it doesn't look too weird, because I thought it was a lot shorter than that geometrically. So the old frame must have had some very unusual reach dimension on the actual frame, because it should in theory be 40 millimeters or 30 millimeters different, but it's only 15, which is great. Yeah, so it's not as far off as I thought. So you've got a choice here. You can go, because you're looking at a one-piece integrated bar stem combination for this thing. We can go out to a 110 or we can go to a 120. Yeah. So it's a bit of a tough call. We'd have to compare the reaches on the bars, just do a little bit of maths there. But if you wanted to be safe, a 110, and if you wanted it to be a little bit more aggressive, a 120. So
110 it is.
110 it is. We'll look at the geometry of the reach of the bar as well. What group set did you have on the old bike, by the way? The Memel?
Shimano.
Shimano. So maybe there was a little bit in the length of the hood that was slightly different as well. But yeah, that explains why it looks fine, because it's only a little bit shorter. It's a lot higher though, a lot higher. So I can't wait to see what your posture looks like on the two bikes. I reckon they're going to be really different. So yeah, man.
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
Doesn't need much. Okay, here's an interesting biomechanical quirk for you guys. Let's say that you've changed the stem length on your bike. You've gone out 20 millimeters to a significantly longer stem. And immediately you start getting frontal knee pain when you're riding, and you can't quite figure out how the heck that's happened. What happens is when you lengthen the reach on the bike or you drop the bar significantly, assuming that the person is biomechanically able to do so, what they will do is they will roll their pelvis further forward to meet the different bar position, whether it's longer or lower, higher and shorter, they will roll their pelvis back most of the time. There are rare circumstances where people don't change this, but assuming that they've got the ability to do so, they will roll their pelvis forward. Now you might notice when you're looking at a human pelvis from the side, we've got a pivot point here on the saddle, and you can see as I roll the pelvis forward, the pivot point of the hip joint moves down and forward in an arc like this, right? So you'll notice that as you roll forward, your seat height effectively lowers because the hip joint moves down and forward closer to the center of the bottom bracket. So this maneuver can be quite large for some people. It can be sort of 15 millimeters of seat height if it's a really big rotational difference in the pelvis, but a lot of the time it's closer to 5 to 10 millimeters. So if you go out, say 20 millimeters on the front, or you drop the front end of the bike 20 millimeters, you may need to raise your seat and move it back at the same time, quite a substantial amount. So this is one of the weird situations where the linkages between all of these kinematic kind of movement patterns on the bike, they're all linked to each other. So when you change the position of the front end, it can change your seat height in the back end and also your seat setback, which sounds really bizarre, but when you explain it like that, it makes a heck of a lot of biomechanical sense. So be wary of that. If you are changing the position of the cockpit and suddenly your pedal stroke feels really different, it's because the seat is now too low and too far forward, and you'll need to move it up and back to suit the different pelvic rotation. So yeah, bit of a tip for you guys. I just thought I'd throw that one in there just to confuse even more people. See if that gets anyone. All right guys, we are finished up here with Ryan. We've done essentially nothing. His position was almost perfect. The guys at Tandem actually replicated the seat height and the setback pretty well from your old position. We've set up a new pair of G8 insoles in his new shoes. We've replicated everything that we had before. We've got a 4mm shim underneath his shorter leg, and we've got a stagger in his cleat position to suit his 2 different size feet. And Ryan basically looks exactly the same as he did 2.5 years ago, with a little bit of a lower FTP and 2 kilos heavier.
Yeah.
But positionally almost identical. And this bike just was set up really well by the guys at the shop. So mad props to them. We're going to go with an integrated one-piece bar on this, and we think we're just going to go 10mm longer to suit the slightly extra bit of reach that he needs. And we know from the old bike that he's at least 15mm higher in the bar position on this one compared to the old bike. So we can afford to go a little bit lower in the front end. So we've marked everything, we've recorded everything, and what we're going to do now is have a look at Ryan's position on his mountain bike. And the subject of the next video is going to be how to transfer your position from a road position to a mountain bike position. How can you extrapolate? This is not going to be an easy one because there's so many nuances to what we're about to talk about, but we'll leave that for the next video. See you then, guys.